All right. Well, it says we're live, so we are live. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this program. I got my good friend Roderick Edwards back over here. I've had him on the show several times. We've discussed everything from preterism to churchism to all kinds of issues. Gary DeMar, you could just browse down and see all the ones that we've done. But Roderick, the reason why we're here is to discuss your new book. I think it's your fifth book. But before we get into it, I just want to welcome you to the program. It's great to have you. How are you, sir?
Pretty good. I'm getting a little older, just like we all are. So I'm a little tired from work. I work at
Yeah.
a farm or a plantation, if you want to call it that, kind of with pineapples and things like that. So I'm a little tired as we get older. Have you seen that meme with John MacArthur? He obviously just passed, and he goes to heaven,
Yeah.
and he's all in white, obviously, and he gets there, and R.C. Sproul Sr.'s up there waiting for him. But R.C. Sproul Sr. is still in his suit. So I kind of laugh about that because he's going to be for eternity. He can be stuck in a suit and tie. So just a little warning: be careful what you wear most of your life, because that's probably what you're going to be in, apparently.
That's true. That's true. I wouldn't want to spend my life in a suit and a tie, especially down here in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
It's 100 degrees right now. But I want to thank you for coming on today. So this, I believe, is your fifth book, and you've sent me your other books. I've read them all. Just an excellent series. All it seems like you're building this series, and I've always said that, we're like Rocky. Just when you think they made the last Rocky movie, find out, you know, 10 years later that there's a Rocky movie. So you're still at it. But what I want to do is just kick it off and ask you, what's the story behind this project and why did you decide to write another book?
I think this might be the sixth one. I'm trying to think about that, but I can't think too hard. I'm a little tired, but I think this is the sixth one, and it's kind of like a spin-off. So as the other one was a collaboration of all of them, this one was kind of influenced by other people saying you need to write one that's a little more polemic, more because when preterists read some of the other books, they're like, well, you're not really convincing me that I want to leave preterism. You're just kind of, because I try not to be very polemic in the other ones. I try to just say here's the pros and here's the cons. As you know, you've read some of the other ones. Here's what happens theologically if you believe this, and here's what if you don't. So, but this one's more directly, grab you by the throat. How do you leave preterism? We know that some ex-preterists have written books like why I left preterism and things like that. So I've never written anything like that because I really think that's kind of self-serving. But this one's core and key is the testimonies, matter of fact, and which you gave me one as well, of ex-preterists who have left the movement. So I think that's really says it all. The rest of the stuff that I put around those testimonies is just window dressing, I believe.
Right. And it's a lot. There's a lot. Books have a lot to offer. I think they give an insight that, like you said, is based on 30 years of experience. Really, it's, you know, speak any with that. We're long enough to pay their own bills. You really do need experience. So coming from the experience of an ex full preterist of 15 years, you was your since you've written this series of books, what has your biggest takeaway from the preterist community? Is it maybe to write more to convince people, or this is just how it's going to be and that's it? That just draw your line in the sand. What's your biggest takeaway?
Well, forgive me because for some reason now after we started, you're cutting in and out, but I think I got the gist of what you're asking. This is, I know I said it last time, but this to me should be the final book that I'm going to write about this topic, because what else can be said? Really, basically, what I'm saying here is that no amount of proof texting, no amount of, hey, get in the Bible with me and look at this text and that text is going to really convince anybody, especially if you know anybody who's been in preterism longer than 4 or 5 years. If you've been in there longer than 4 or 5 years, you're really not going to listen to anybody. You're going to listen to only yourself. As you look at the various testimonies, whether they've gone into atheism or gone back to some orthodox expression of Christianity, None of them say, well, there was a silver bullet text in the Bible that got me, and once I read that, I went back or I left. None of them say that, because that's not what does it. What does is realizing that if you continue on the course of preterism, you will no longer be Christian.
Let me see if I can adjust settings. I just want to make sure that for some reason it's showing that my internet connection is a little bit weak, but I'm plugged directly into the router, so I don't see how that is. Let me see if I can tweak this. Just
okay at the moment, please. Okay at the moment.
Okay. If I'm okay at the moment, then I'll just leave it as it is. It should come back. Yeah, I think that's the key right there. What I did was I shared this podcast. I shared the link with a few forums, and one of the forums was an excellent forum too. Was Jeff Vaughn's and Tony Denton's forum. It's a preterist forum. It's really the only one that I know that hasn't been completely taken over by either IO or atheism. So I appreciate the comments, but most of the reaction that I got from that, and I haven't had time really to respond to anybody because I've been in meetings all week, but the general response that I saw coming in from that was, why would anybody want to leave preterism? So maybe you could ask, like, what's wrong with preterism? Why would anybody want to leave preterism?
Right, and I talk about that in the book because somebody did respond like that to me directly. Why would anybody want to leave preterism? That question there really should be, why would anybody want to leave anything? So if somebody, why would anybody want to leave Mormonism? Why would anybody want to leave Jehovah's Witness? Why would anybody want to leave Christianity? So when somebody asks that question, we have to ask, what's wrong with these things? Is there something wrong with it? What does it do to a person to be a Christian, to be a Mormon, or to be a Jehovah's Witness, or to be a preterist? For one, preterism is all consuming, as you know. Once you truly get into it, it changes not just your eschatology, which some people hate this word, eschatology. It changes how you look at the church, how you look at the church leadership, how you look at history, how you even look at politics and in your daily life. If sin's done away with, you might think, well, I can sin all I want. Who cares? The judgment's already passed. We even had in the 1800s, there was even a whole community in New York called the Oneida community that basically believed that the resurrection already passed and they're therefore no longer given into marriage. So when they took this logic to its extreme extent, they no longer had marriages. They basically had a polyamorous community where they had sex with each other. So it does have an effect on you. So that's the reason. Why would anybody want to leave preterism? Because it's not Christianity. That's my first answer. It's something different. So
right. And as I was going through your book, I saw that these are the points that I think ever since I've known you, since like 2007, these are the points that you have continually hammered home. I remember you had a blog years ago, and it was the same thing. This is not Christianity. This is different, something different from Christianity. I guess the question that I would ask as a follow-up is, how would you overcome the institutional distrust? Because again, I was browsing through Jeff Vaughn's and Tony Denton's forum, and I was just looking at some of the comments earlier.
Oh yes, I'm sure really hostile. Well, first of all, let me clarify. I'm not saying that by saying it's not Christianity. I'm not talking about anybody's salvation. I don't know anything about that. That's between them and God. I'm never talking about that when I say that. I'm saying, just like if you were in America and you were born in America, had a birth certificate and everything, but you were going around advocating socialism and all kinds of stuff, that's ideologically not American. So you technically aren't American in the ideological sense. So preterism in the ideological sense, in the historical and the communal sense, is not Christianity. It's something different. So how do I overcome preterists who would immediately try to put up a wall against that? I don't. That's the point of it. I don't come over it. Matter of fact, I tell them in the book, I said, I kind of being a little sarcastic in the book, but take it all away. That's where you talked earlier about the IO and the Israel only. I think if you take preterism all the way, you will become IO, because that's the consistent interpretation of preterism. It all happened in the past. It was only for that audience. It's not for us. I mean, that's consistent. I applaud them. That's right. And even the ones that say, well, maybe then we shouldn't even worry about this, and they become functional or real atheists, I applaud them too, because that's consistent.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you on that. The problem that I've seen is with the institutional, the institutional distrust. And I was looking at some of these forums, is like, don't you think that it bolsters them? sometimes when you come out with a new view. This is what I've seen, not just from preterists, but from even from futurists, always coming out with something new, playing off of the common, I guess, distrust of institutions that has permeated our society, where everybody was, there's this big conspiracy where everybody was either lying or they were, and you've seen, within the Roman Catholic Church and within even the Southern Baptist churches, you've seen all these scandals. And so I was reading a poll recently of why people are leaving the churches. There's the church attendance with all the denominations are just taking a nosedive, and one of the top reasons was distrust of institutions. So I look at some of these comments, and it looks like they're saying, these guys, they were obviously, they were wrong, but look at what else. Well, look what they were doing. They were murdering and killing and stuff. So how do we? I guess I'm just trying to get a good consensus from all of your books as to where we take this, how we overcome that institutional distrust and get people back to. I'm assuming in all of your books, you're trying to get people back to the Christian church, not just in Christianity as a philosophy or as a set of beliefs, but in institutional Christianity. Did I get that part wrong?
Right. Well, I'm not necessarily. I'm trying to get them back there. I'm trying to distinguish the differences between, I call it historical communal, because.
Oh, okay.
Because the reason I call it that is because Christ came to not just create a bunch of individuals interpreting the Bible how they want. There was a community, the ecclesia, the body, the saints. So there's this combination that we're supposed to be. Now, preterists like to poo-poo that and say, well, where is it? Which one is it? It's the Baptists? Is it the Roman Catholics? But so they have to cause doubt and negate, which doesn't help their case any, because a lot of people could just say, well, maybe all of it's wrong. That's the approach they could take. So it doesn't really help the preterists to try to negate Christianity in general and say, well, it's full of murderers and liars and killers and people who are con men. Okay, well, if that's true, then why are we doing any of it? Why are we doing any of it, whether preterism or not? So that didn't really help their case any. So my point was of twofold. One, either get preterists to go all the way, which I believe will end up in functional atheism if you continue on in its full direction, unless you park somewhere like in Matthew 24. But as you've seen from a lot of testimonies, a lot of them went all the way, and they were being very honest and they turned over every stone. And it's not like they were weak preterists; they were really strong preterists. Or I want people to return to some form of communal, and I'm not even telling them which one, because it's not my place. A lot of them went back to Orthodox Greek or became Orthodox Greek. Some of them, I think you said you're a Universalist, which, being a fairly staunch Calvinist would have a problem with that. But I'd rather you at least move towards the communal faith of Christianity than, not being a preterist. So,
yeah. And I mean, we were there when the movement was, I think, at its, I guess I would say the movement was at its zenith.
Yeah, in 1990s, it is at its peak. It basically had all kinds of 4 or 5 conferences a year and all these things, even though it was the same people over and over. But it was, it was making inroads to the Reformed faith, through the R.C. Sproul's and the David and all these other people making all these different inroads. But now you don't really hear any much about it, because it's really kind of ran its course, and a lot of people aren't going to go the IO route, because it gives you nothing. IOs basically say, well, then we're done. We'll just close our Bible up and be done with it. It's not for us.
Right. In your book, I noticed that you got into the backbone of the movement. You talked about some of the teachers and some of the leaders. You mentioned, I think, Ed Stevens. Of course, you mentioned Don Preston and some others. Is it difficult to separate the doctrine from the people who endorse it? Because I've noticed that whenever anybody talks about full preterism, it's very, very difficult. Seems to me to be difficult, really, to separate, to just talk about the ideas without, going down a list of suspects. Is it? Go ahead.
Well, one, as you'll notice, first of all, I don't try to know a lot about somebody's personal life. I don't know anything. I don't even know Don Preston's wife's name. I don't know any of these things. I don't even know what state he lives in. I think it might be Oklahoma or Utah. I have no idea. So when I talk about it, yes, you still have to talk about the person. Even the Bible talks about specific people. Paul talked about specific people in the Bible. So because it is their main doctrine, they're the ones espousing it mainly. So we need to talk about them. Now, I don't talk about, Don Preston's hair is funny or anything. I don't know anything about that. I do say that he uses tactics that seem like a used car salesman, catch the power of this, stuff like the little catchphrases. But that has nothing to do with Don Preston, the person. I have no idea who he is as a person. So, yes, I think it is necessary to still talk about the person because they're pushing their agenda, whatever it might be. And there's different ones that you've been here long enough to see, like the Ward Finleys who push the no more sin, and the different ones. They have different little flavors they have to push. So it's important to distinguish that.
Yeah, it is. That was a Heaven Now, I think, that he was coming out with there's a long time ago.
And Ed Stevens has the Rapture one, so there you go. And Ed Stevens, you see that quote in the book, he basically said he searched all over the place through church history, the Antecedent Fathers and everything else, and couldn't find preterism anywhere. This is from one of the major preterist leaders in the movement, says he couldn't find it anywhere. So he admits it, but then he can't find it anywhere, but he still keeps on going full speed ahead into it.
Wow. Why do you think that is?
What's that?
I know. Well, why do you think that is? You had said something about presuppositional, the push of presuppositionalism in your book. I think you even devoted a chapter to that. Mm-hmm. But do you think that's the reason behind it, is because it's such a heavily presuppositional ideology? It just sort of forces you to go in one direction?
Right. And plus, I think it's investment. And I don't want to talk to people like, some people say you leave preterism because you're a coward or you want to be part of the clique or something like that. I don't. I'm not part of any clique or any. I don't think I could be considered a coward. I've taken on people on all kinds of podcasts and everything else. But what I'm trying to say about Ed Stevens, I think what happens is you get so far into it and it is who you are. How are you going to give it up now? It's too much. It is who you are. Who would Ed Stevens be without preterism? Who would Don Preston be without preterism? They spent 30 years or more devoting their life to it. Hopefully they could leave it, but maybe they can't. Maybe it's just, they're going to have to go down that road.
Yeah. Another question that I would have, that I've seen a few people weigh in from the angle of, well, what about Orthodox preterism? I'm not a full preterist. I'm an Orthodox, or they don't use that term. They would use, most of them would use the term partial preterist. But then, you see people like Ken Gentry, who is probably one of the most vocal opponents of full preterism. But then if you read his commentary on, I've got his two-volume commentary on Revelation. Man, he's pushing the pedal to the metal on a lot of stuff. But he's still Orthodox. But then he only devotes a very, very slim number of pages to the final eschaton, or the final general judgment and resurrection, which is supposed to be the most important thing to hold on to. But what about all these guys that are the Doug Wilsons and who by the way had an interview with a full preterist? I think it was last year. Sometimes all these guys like Doug Wilson, Ken Gentry, even Gary DeMar, who are still standing within the Orthodox scheme of things, because they believe in a general judgment, general resurrection, and an end of history. But they're holding, if you were to look at their theology and just analyze their theology, you would have to agree that they're more towards the full preterist side than they are towards the Orthodox side. What would you say toward that system?
Right. Earlier on, when I left full preterism and I was coming out of it, you could probably find writings where I was kind of okay with partial preterism or Orthodox preterism. I now don't, let's get rid of that term altogether. Let's quit, because it all leads to full preterism eventually, as we're saying here. Matter of fact, I think you and I would agree that Gary DeMar's books and Ken Gentry's books have probably made more full preterist, than all the books that Don Preston could ever write. Their books made them into do. Now they'll say, well, it's not our fault that somebody took my writings and went on. Well, it is your fault that you don't clarify how they can only go so far, or not far enough, and not that far. And there's no clear hard stop in any of their books, as you say. They kind of devote just a few pages. And now we have Gary DeMar, who even the so-called partial preterists are saying, well, no, he's really a full preterist. He just won't come out and say it. So, I mean, I'm not want to get in those battles over. We've already had these discussions before, but I'm just against all forms of preterism. Now, we just had somebody ask me about the desolation, the abomination of desolation. What was it? And, somebody, I think it was Rivers of Eden, answered the fellow and basically was talking about whatever it was, it happened in the first century, and that makes you a preterist, and it's a preterist interpretation. No, it's not. If you look at almost all of the historic Christian commentaries on Matthew 24:15, basically, which is that talks about the abomination of desolation, they say that it could be anything from, because Gentiles were not supposed to go in the Holy of Holies. It was sacrilege. And so when the Romans entered those areas, it was considered a abomination of desolation. That's most of the interpretations of that Matthew 24:15 of historical Christianity will say it's something along those lines, whether it's the actual Roman standards with the eagle on there and all that, or if it's just the human being of the Gentile himself going in there. So my point is that it doesn't take preterism to interpret that text that way. It never did. It doesn't make you a preterist. But what preterists do is they'll take that and they'll say, see, aha, because a lot of people have never heard that interpretation. They've only heard the dispensational interpretation of the abomination of desolation, which is something in the future when, some world leader, the anti-Trump or whatever, goes into the new rebuilt temple. That's what they've heard. So when they hear the interpretation by John Gill, which sounds more like a preterist interpretation, they'll say, well, I never seen that. And they'll think, maybe I am a preterist after all. So it's kind of a shell game they're playing.
Right. Yeah, I've got John Gill's. I've actually got a volume of his back there. Great stuff. And that's true. And you mentioned in your book that most of the people that come to full preterism are disproportionately from the dispensational crowd. Would you say that's correct?
I would say that's correct, because it is a overreaction or reaction to dispensationalism and all the Left Behind movies, any minute that's going to happen. That's not what historical Christianity ever believed. That's something that really started coming around in the 1800s. And then you have also the connection with the Church of Christ. There are so many of them that come out of the Church of Christ, the full preterists. John Preston, Max King, Virgil Vidovich no longer in there, and you got Ken. I can't remember some of these names. I'm starting to get too old for these names. But all these different guys that come out of there. Why is that? It's because that's the restorationist movement. The restorationist movement, at its core, says that somewhere along the line the church failed. There was an apostasy so bad that the church failed to exist, basically, and it had to be restored, not just reformed, not just recaptured, but it had to be restored. So that's the reason why there's so many in it, because it fits perfectly with preterism, that everything's failed and they have to restore it. So now they're the champions of the new restored church.
Right. And you mentioned in your book about Max King. I thought it was kind of funny when you mentioned you put a quote from him where he was talking about sectarian upstarts. Was that?
That was Tim King. Yeah, it was Tim King. That's his son. But yes, it's funny because at the time, if you recall back when you said the peak in 1990s, the Max King faction, the Covenant Eschatology group, they were trying to move away from the preterists because the preterists were becoming more belligerent, more hostile, more militant in their approaches, more like a Charles Guiteau. So they moved away and started creating their own even trademark version of preterism called transmillennialism or presence ministries, which I think is really more or less defunct now. It became more of a social movement and didn't go anywhere. And yeah, he basically said, he was saying, how dare you tell us what my dad invented this thing, and how dare you tell us what it is? We get to tell you what it is.
Yeah, that's kind of arrogant. I never did get into King. I was never a big fan of any of those Church of Christ guys. But I mean, I could see where because they're fundamentalists, so they appeal to that fundamentalist crowd. Your Bible only. This is preach the word, brother. They get into that. And a lot of it's like from the theology that you would get down south, as opposed to like a northern, liberal theology that's going to look at things from, say, a critical, standpoint. And when I went to SMU, one of the things that I had to take a class in critical, just critical exegesis and looking at the text from a critical standpoint. So you get the different perspectives. And it's a lot of stuff like if you had preached anything like that to these guys, they would have been like, whoa, this is heresy. This is heresy. Critical, university level scholarship is heresy. But you think it appeals to people because they were raised in a sort of a fundamentalist background, or do you think that it doesn't really have much to do with fundamentalism? It's just due to the individual, the quirks of character of individuals, or do you think it's more of a reaction towards a general movement?
Well, having some background in the fundamental Baptist background, I would say we may have to make a distinction here. The Baptists are more like that. Just me and my King James Bible, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to know anything else. They're typically not very academic. I hate to say it that way. They're not. It's just more, I don't care about history of the history of the church. I just care about what my King James and my pastor says and meeting for the baked bean supper at the end. Whereas the Church of Christ group, yes, they're fundamentalists, but they're fundamentalists in a different way. They're more like, let's parse every little text in the Bible and Wilson, make sure we interpret it this way and see what it really means and get behind it. But they're still fundamentalists because they still don't care about history. Even Don Preston's, I mentioned several times in the book, he actually literally says, I don't care about tradition and I don't care what other people believe. Now, that sounds noble. I just want to follow the Lord. That sounds noble, but it's not, because again, the Christianity is a communal faith. It's meant to be part of a larger group. And so when you don't care about what other people believe and whatever people have ever believed and the traditions of the church and why they believe those things, then you're basically making yourself an outcast and you don't care. And no wonder you get off on these tangents. No wonder you become novice. No wonder he told us that in his testimony of how he became a full preterist, that he did it after he was preaching to a woman's Bible study, and his pastor, his preacher dad, didn't tell him about it, and his seminary professors weren't able to answer his questions. But he said it didn't take him very long to understand into the full preterist movement. To me, that's a dangerous mission. It's almost really, you didn't see that you're basically admitting you are a novice. You started out as a novice and you ran with this novice idea. So it's a different kind of fundamentalism. But yet, so one more thing, and I think the key is, and I mentioned this in the books, the concept of sola scriptura is so much twisted as to what it really is supposed to be. Martin Luther went around talking about the ancient faith. So he paired sola scriptura with the ancient faith. He didn't just me and my Bible, and I don't care what anybody says, and I'm going to interpret how I want. He said, no, let's see how the ancient faith interpreted it, but rely on the Bible as our source for everything in life. That's what he was trying to get at. Not like, I just want to interpret it the way I want to interpret it. That's more of a Church of Christ, sometimes even an independent fundamental Baptist perspective.
Towards the last quarter of your book, you made a great point when you talked about canonicity. How did the canon develop? And you said something to the effect of, well, it just didn't just drop from the sky. The Bible didn't drop from the sky. There was a process where the canon actually had to develop. So you have to rely on the same people that you're criticizing, saying they didn't know anything. Well, you're accepting their verdict. Do you think it sounded like that was a pretty important part of your general argument? In fact, you even said, don't let them get it. Don't let them walk away from this. Make them, hold their feet to the fire. Canonicity, have your views on this changed, or do you pretty much still feel that this is a way forward? Maybe if nothing else works, maybe try to get them into some historical analysis. Is that where you were going with that?
Well, let's think of it this way. So you often hear prayers say, I just want to get in the Bible. Just quit all this talk about this and epistemology and presuppositionalism and all this stuff and the history of the church. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk, here's this text, and what do you think this text means? Okay, but I want to ask him, what is the Bible? Is it the 66 books? And why is it the 66 books? Why isn't the longer versions? Are you still here, by the way?
Yeah, I just had to let my cat out. Sorry.
Okay, just make sure you get off. I didn't want to go on and on if you got up. Okay.
I usually try to kick my cat out, but he was here, so I had to
okay, no worries. I just want to make sure. So what happens is you can't let them leave that point, because they'll immediately get you into proof texting, and really they can't even tell you what the Bible is. It's sort of like somebody who wants to talk about what the Constitution says, and then you say, hey, well, let's look at the founding fathers and see what they said. Well, I don't care about what they had to say, but these are the guys who wrote it, and here's their opinion on it. Here they even wrote some commentary on what they mean by the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms and everything like that. Well, I don't care about that. I just want to look at it my way, and I want to interpret it my way. That's just not an honest way to approach not even just the Constitution, but the Bible. To me, that's a theological liberal argument, sort of like when political liberals want to ignore, precedents and the founding fathers' commentary on the Constitution and rule of law.
Let me ask you this: is there a uniform way out for preterists? Because you shared a lot of testimonies, and I read through those testimonies. Some of the names I wasn't familiar with, but it seems like everybody is sharing their views on where they went after they left preterism. And so what I'm noticing is it seems like there's a disproportionate number of people who are moving more towards either, say, high churchly forms of Christianity like Eastern Orthodoxy, or on the other hand, at the very least, say a more agnostic view. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
I believe that's really the two routes that you're going to take if you continue pushing it. You could try to park anywhere in your preterism. You could say I'm a partial preterist, which in a way is already admitting that you're not fully preterist, you're not committed to. It's like, I'm a partial American, I'm a partial Calvinist, I'm a whatever it is you're partial of. You're already setting yourself up for people attacking your partialism. But my point is that if you keep pushing it far enough, it's got to go one or the other direction. It has to go to IO, to atheism, agnosticism, or you have to say, you know what, some of these, and I hate to say it this way, some of these crazy people who don't understand sola scriptura, whether it's the Independent Fundamental Baptist or it's the Church of Christ who believe they're the restored church, I'm not going back there because they clearly don't know what they're talking about. That's what caused this in the first place. So they look for something a little more meaty, something that has a little more history to it, like you said, the Orthodox Church. Whereas they could look at the Roman Catholic. You don't see too many go back to Roman Catholic because Roman Catholic is so obvious where it went wrong when it declared the Pope as the one and only, bishop. So that's where they basically went wrong, and that's the reason why you don't see preterists going back there that often.
Right, but now the Catholics, they would say, and I think the Eastern Orthodox would say too, hey, how many of us do you see going over to full preterism? So they'll say that, maybe this is a subject for your next book, or maybe you can talk.
I hope there's no bet next book, please.
They'll say, see, this is sola scriptura. In fact,
they're right.
This is the reason why you guys are so messed up.
And they're right.
You need the traditions and the word of God. You just
exactly.
Can't be, yeah.
100% agree with them. They're right, but it's to me, it's not sola scriptura is bad. It's the fact that we misunderstand it. Like I said in the book, I mentioned Keith Matheson's book, The Shape of Sola Scriptura. That was a great book, and it helped me as I was leaving preterism to reconcile that concept, because I still am a big sola scriptura guy. It's the Bible. If God is sovereign, then he's given us a word and he's preserved it somehow so we can understand and use it for our daily lives and instruction in general. Otherwise, it's pointless. We just make it up as we go. So I have to believe that. Otherwise, all of it's kind of pointless.
Right. So it sounds like there's a fine line that we need to walk. And this is something that I think you brought out in your book, in your series, but it's something that we've learned from experience, that there is kind of a fine line to walk. Once you leave preterism, it's like you can fall off the cliff really quickly. So what do you think what is the path forward for someone? Well, let me just ask this first. What would be the point where somebody would begin to say, look, I need to leave this system? What do you think would be the catalyst for that?
Well, I think they have to come to a realization that whatever you're becoming is not Christian. And a lot of people say, well, I don't care, I'll go it my own way. Okay, but you're not. You have to realize, if you don't come to that aha moment that I'm not really a Christian. Well, I think I'm a Christian, I feel like I'm faithful, but you're not. You're not part of the community of saints. You're something different, just as much as Mormonisms and Jehovah's Witnesses are. There's something different there. They're interpreting the Bible completely different than it's ever been interpreted. And so it's not what the Reformers did. The Reformers didn't just interpret the Bible differently. Again, Martin Luther appealed to the ancient faith. They just went back and went pre-Roman Catholic and said, here, wait a minute, this is what the church always believed right here before you guys came along and said you were the only bishop. And so once you realize that moment, now you have to say, well, now what do I do with this? Do I continue this? Where do I go with this? I realize I've somehow, I think as Kevin in his testimony, he realized that he was just debating proof text, he says in his testimony. And when he came to that realization that he wasn't really a follower of Christ, he didn't say whether he's saved or not saved. We're not getting into that. That's not my place, and maybe not even his place to say. Only he knew. But the point is that he realized that he wasn't a Christian, had to do something different about it.
Right.
So if you don't come to that moment, there's nothing none of you and I are going to do about it, no matter what we say to him.
When did you see? Well, let's see if I can phrase this right. Have you noticed a decline, say, in the people in the people who are leaving full preterism, a decline in their preferring, say, another form of Christianity to, say, something like a more agnostic approach? It seems to me like the people that I'm running into now, I've got people even on my channel, people just come in out of the blue and start commenting, and I'm seeing a lot more. I want to call it agnosticism. I don't want to call it atheism, because I don't think a lot of them are atheists. But I think I hear a lot. We can't know it. We can't know anything. Don't pretend to tell me what this is about, or what anyone, that anybody was right in the past. We can't know anything. This is all just a mystery, and this is something that we'll never figure out. I'm seeing that more and more and more. And I'm wondering where it's coming from. Would you attribute that to, say, full preterism, or would you attribute that just to the basic, more to the relativism that's been kind of seeped into our society from other?
It's probably both, but I mentioned again the chapter presuppositional. They already presuppose certain things, like they presuppose, and we talked about this early on, that the church has gotten it wrong, that there's been a giant conspiracy, and that nobody understood it, and then they start breaking down the text of the Bible, thinking they can figure it out. And then when they realize they can't figure it out either, that's when they get to the point where we can't really know anything. And then they become subjective. And you have people like Sam Frost, who goes around saying that he believes people can find new things in the Bible that are perfectly legitimate to interpret like nobody's ever interpreted before. That, to me, is really dangerous. I mean, coming from somebody who was a full preterist, basically that's even worse. That's a subjectivism I think is worse than the full preterism. So I don't know. It's really messed up.
Yeah, where do you see it going? Where's the future of the movement? I guess I have to say not the future of the doctrine, but the future of the movement, because it seems like that's where everything is centered within the movement. Where do you see it going?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious for most people who are on any kind of social forums with preterism. As you said, you alluded to it. It seems like there's a lot of IO moving into agnosticism. And it's only logical, because, again, the two main premises of preterism is it's all fulfilled in the first century, and it's all about the audience relevance of only the first century. So if you just boil those down, you come to either it was only about the faithful Abrahamic sons via DNA, or the faithful Abrahamic sons via DNA and the ones that came in there at the end. The Gentiles who were being brought in. After that, there's nobody else. So, I mean, to me, that's a consistent interpretation of their presupposition.
Right. We're seeing more and more of that. Do you think that these guys are going to give the mainstays a run for their money ultimately? Because it seems like that's what they're doing now, but we're just, things haven't just completely unwound yet. It just seems like the older form, like the Max King preterism, I think we talked about this in a previous podcast, where that older Max King form of preterism is kind of becoming obsolete. There's still some people, obviously, who hold it strongly, but it seems like now the IO versions are coming out, and they're kind of giving these guys a run for their money. Do you see that this is being a problem in the future, or do you see this as being maybe helping the cause of finally bringing about the downfall of full preterism, or how do you see it?
Well, definitely, as we talked about when we first came in here, we're all getting older, and so a lot of the main movers and shakers have already passed on. So we only got a few more of them, and once they pass on, there's really no one left. And those ones have left. I mean, we talked about Sam Frost. I know people think I'm always railing against him, but he was a main circuit speaker. When he left, he realized that, look, I can't systemize preterism. it's getting too many people who won't stop here, who won't stop there. You can only go so far. And he was trying to do that, and it wouldn't work because, again, preterism's main premise, one of its main premises, you don't get to tell me, because we don't like you said, we don't get to trust the institution anymore. So we get to decide. We get to pick up our Bible, and we're going to decide. And how dare you tell me anything? So it's just going to fragment more and more, I believe, as it goes on. And it will exist always, because, once these ideas get rolling, they're always going to be there. And there's always going to be these books, pro and con. But I just don't know if it's ever going to have its heyday like it had back in the 1990s. I think that's over with.
Yeah. What would you say to someone who says, and I've heard this testimony too, who says, preterism has changed my life for the better. It has changed my life. It got me away from all that doom and gloom, Hal Lindsey stuff, the world's going to end tomorrow. It gave me a new lease on life, gave me a new way to look at the world. We're not at war with the devil. God's in control. And you hear some reform guys saying, God's in control. This is sovereign God we're talking about here. So what would you say to the people that say, my life has been transformed by full preterism, and there's no way you're going to convince me that it's wrong or that it's evil, because something that's this evil cannot produce such miraculous and beneficial results, which it obviously has in the lives of so many? What would you say about that positive testimony that comes in? And it does come in.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? How would you respond to some of that?
It makes me think of an experience I had when I was young. I was 19. And I worked in a pretty rough neighborhood in a car wash. And I'm out there washing cars, and I go out in this corner, and there's this really, really nice dressed black man. Now, this whole area, it has nothing to do with race, but this whole area is the black people who are typically, looking gangster and wearing the hoodies and, looking like they're gangsters. But this guy is in a bow tie and a suit, and he's in a nice shiny shoes, and he's standing in the corner. I knew nothing about these guys, but I was like, what the heck is this? And so I walk up to him, started interacting with him, talking with him. Guess who he is? He's a Louis Farrakhan. He was one of those, the black Muslims. And he was very respectful, sir. Yes, sir. He's very, very respectful, and looked like his life was in order. He didn't go to prison. He even told me, give a testimony how he got out of that and everything else. So just because you have found a philosophy that orders your life, whether it's Mormonism, Preterism, Jehovah's Witness, Islam, just because any philosophy, once you apply it to your life, it gives it order, which makes it look like you're now have something positive. So preterism by itself makes you get over the dispensationalism, the doom and gloom. And he's coming back any minute. There's going to be the 10 kings coming out of Europe, and blah, blah, blah. Ronald Reagan's 666 because Ronald Wilson Reagan was the number of the beast. You have all this stuff swirling around in your head from culture, and it frees you from all that. I get that. So, you got to take a step back and say, why wasn't I freed from this before that? And I submit that if you understood historical communal Christianity and its interpretations, like the abomination of desolation, you wouldn't have had to go on the whole full preterism route. But you were, for whatever reason, I wasn't privy to that. I was, I came up basically as a teenager in the independent fundamental Baptist who told me a lot of lies about how baptism was applied and everything else. So, and it took me a little bit of looking into actual Christian history to understand that, and unfortunately challenging, people who I previously respected.
Right. Whatever happens to your kingdom commentaries? I was doing a little poking around today. I was trying to find some of those, and that was a great series you had. What happened to them?
Well, those, if I recall right, for that, first of all, that was all hosted on. There's one thing you and I have learned, that if you allow somebody else to host your stuff, eventually they'll somehow they'll get people to boycott it, and now your stuff's getting removed and you can't even have access to it anymore, which happened to me. So that happened to me early on, before, as I was doing the Kingdom commentary. So I got my own site, had all that there. I think I interviewed, I was interviewing once a week, Don Preston, all the people. I was doing a lot of that, and it all went away because that site went away, and I didn't back any of that up because at the time I was really frustrated with anything preterism. And I think there's a couple little pieces here and there where people have saved it on their own, but most of it's gone.
Right. That's too bad. Yeah, some of that stuff disappears, but it would be nice to have some of that back, just to listen to those, see how much has changed since then within the movement, because it really has changed. There's really not a lot of conservatism within the movement anymore. Do you see that conservatism being phased out because of the older people are dying, or people are just becoming more, or I should say more irresponsible in the way they study theology? How do How do you account for that?
Well, first of all, back up a little bit. So the books that I wrote before, I compiled into one book called The Complete Guide on Preterism, which I believe is probably the most complete historical guide. So it's not about debating people or anything like that. It's about telling you how preterism has developed from the get-go to now. So if you want to know how it's developed and how we got here, those groups of books are really good for you. But I think what happens in general, and there's a lot of parallels with politics. For example, the guy who's running in New York now, the Democrat socialist, and Bernie Sanders, the Democrat socialist, just a few, 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, if you said you were a Democrat socialist out in the open, you're done. Nowadays, you can run and possibly win in one of the biggest cities, if not the biggest city in the United States, as the mayor. And so I think it's just a constant liberalism where we chip away at conservatism, because conservatism sounds like you're stuck. It's status quo. That's what conservatism sounds like. Instead of saying I'm conserving or preserving the old paths like the Bible tells you to do. So I think there's more and more that to push us and to find the next new thing. A lot of these preterist leaders want to stand out. So they have to have something new, some new little niche that they have that's different than the other preterists. Like, we have Ed Stevens with his first century rapture. We have you had Ward Finley with his No More Sin and things like that. So you have these niches. And so what's going to happen is you're just going to have more and more people looking for their niches, how they can put things and push it further along. And it's just going to deteriorate from there, I think. And yes, because the old guys are passing away too, the old guard.
Right. So this is, I think you said this is your 6th book. So I'm assuming that this is going to go, I mean, you've probably got more to say on the subject of preterism, but what has been your general response toward the series? Has it been more, I mean, it's okay to be booed, because I know a lot of times when we stand up and say something that's true and we try to be real about something, we will get booed. But what has been the general response? Have you gotten any positive testimonies about people, about you changing people's views on this subject?
Yes, I've had many, but unfortunately, as I say in here, because I'm very honest, I don't think I can force somebody to become Christian. So again, I say either go all the way or don't. And so I have a lot of people that have been following the series that become full-on atheists or agnostics. And to me, that's okay, because hopefully it's a movement, because I don't think that's your final resting place unless you die in that thing. I don't think a lot of the ones in the testimonies that are even in the book that they're agnostic or atheists, I don't think that's their final resting place. They're ideologically. But yes, I also had other ones that have been the testimonies in there. As I said, it's really helped them along the way, along with others. I don't think I'm Mr. Wonderful. I'm the spokesman for how to get out of preterism. We're all doing this. And so I just offer this. My main offering is just basically the history and the development of it. Whereas other people get into how you understand Mello now, and here's how you understand Prussia. I don't get into that. Could I? I could, but that kind of stuff really annoys me. I was a data analyst for most of my life, and I'm just kind of done breaking down the numbers. I don't want to do that anymore. I like the bigger picture. And that's where I'm going to reside at. And plus, I write a whole bunch of other books. So I don't like to spend as much time as maybe other people like to get in the minutiae of preterism. So, hopefully this one's the very last one, because that's really I pulled out all the stops here and said how it is. So,
well, it's very direct, and this, I think you said this was one of your most straightforward books on the subject. I found it very straightforward. It's a good book. I want everybody to check it out. I believe you said it was available on Amazon now. Is that true?
It is. I think the ebook version is still, because I thought I wasn't going to be done in time, so I think it's still holding. It should clear tomorrow, the next day, but you can get the paperback. And I try to keep everything really cheap. I'm barely making a profit on purpose, because I want these books, especially the theological books, to be as accessible as possible. So, I mean, you can get them.
You mean you're not going to sell them for $30 a piece?
No, as a matter of fact, if you still can't afford it and you want to write me, email me, I'll give you the PDF copy for free. I have no problem with that. And I have lots of the audio copies. As soon as the audiobook comes out, to me, this was really good as an audiobook. It hasn't come out yet, but I think I let you listen to one of the chapters. I gave you one of the chapters. It's a great, the narrator, which narrates all of them, but he does a really good job on this one too. So I would suggest you get it as an audiobook.
Yeah, it's a good book. How does this compare with other books, say, that are on the market? Other books about preterism that are on the market?
Well, just like most of my other books, again, I don't get into, and I do some places, even in this book, I get in some place like Matthew 10:23 and things like that. I get into some of the text, but again, I believe that trying to go head to head with the preterists about the text is pointless because they already made up in their mind what the interpretation is. And they say they're using hermeneutics and exegesis and everything. Okay, so nobody else is, just you are? I mean, I hate to say it that way, but just you are, only you're using exegesis? All these other Christians in history, all these different commentaries that come to almost a unified interpretation of this compared to yours over spans of hundreds and hundreds of years, they're all wrong, but somehow you're right. Now, what somebody will say, well, that's what they said to Luther. You're not little Luthers because you're not going around saying, let's get back to the ancient faith. You're saying, here's a new paradigm shift. That's what we called it back in the 90s. As preterists, we said it's a paradigm shift. We realized it was something new, and we didn't care that we realized it's something new. So I think it compares in the fact that it's more in your face, bold, and it just goes around all this whole minutia about what does this text say? What does that text say? Who cares? What does the presupposition say about whether this is actually a Christian belief or not?
Right. And so this is, so I'm assuming this is going to be a great seller for you because again, it's something that a lot of people are looking into. I hear it all the time, is this view wrong that I believe? And it seems like there's not a lot of options. There's more people going into IO, I think, than retracing their steps. But if you write another book, that'll make it number 7. But what are your writing plans for the near future?
Well, theologically, so I wrote another one called, which we don't talk about much, which is good. I think we might have had a show. I don't know. It's Historical Christianity. I think we actually did one. I like that book because it's more broad. It talks about ecclesiology and everything else and tries to show you that there is a unified continuity in Christianity. Because you love preterists will say, well, where's the true church then? Is it the Baptist? Is it the Roman? Which one? They like to play that game. So what I'm trying to show in that book is the continuity. So theologically, books I think I'm going to write next maybe is this one called Impossible Compassion. And it basically is it jumps off from where Jesus tells you if somebody steals your coat, also give them your jacket. He didn't say if they borrow it. He says if they steal it. To me, that's really, Jesus? You want me to give the thief my jacket after I think most of us Christians now, I'm not going to, because we're running out of time anyhow, and that's what the show about, but the interpretation of that text is very important because it tells us about Christian compassion in general. It's really almost impossible to live up to. So I want to write a little bit about that.
Well, I look forward to that. And I want to thank you also for sharing your books with me via PDF, because I mean, honestly, I try to read these things on my breaks. I have breaks at work where things kind of slow down, so then I can read a little PDF. But it's been a great journey. Just going all the way back 18 years through your blogs and through your the infighting with all the other Phil Nasons and all those guys. It's been a journey, but it's also been a learning experience because we're looking at it now as like, man, it's changed so much since back then. But at the same time, it's like what was the seeds that were being sown back then, we're seeing fully, bearing full fruit now. I don't know if you remember, but I said sometime around 2009, I said there is going to be a crap load of people renouncing Christianity through this doctrine of covenant eschatology. And I can't find the post. I looked for the post. It probably got deleted. WordPress deleted a bunch of my stuff. But I remember saying that around 2009. And then, here we are, 2025, and it's like people are using full preterism as an escape from Christianity, which I feel is a shame, because even though I'm not a full preterist, so I'm not like, trying to fan their asses or anything, but I'm just saying it's a shame, because at least it's still confessing Jesus Christ and his salvation. Whereas you're leaving Christianity and now you're using full preterism as an excuse.
Well, maybe they need to be the prodigal son, though, that goes completely away for a moment, lies down with the pigs and wanders around like that. before they can come back to something a little more real. What they were doing before as a Christian maybe wasn't real. It really wasn't. They're just going through the motions. I don't know, but maybe they know that. And then I'm hoping that's where they go to eventually.
Right. Any last words, any announcements, anything else you'd like to say about this book? I mean, we're coming up on an hour right now. So I don't think we have any questions coming. There are actually a lot of comments, but most of them are just, people sharing their thoughts. Michael Karras came in and he said, let's see. He said, I love Roderick's passion. I hope he feels good about what he's doing, and God blesses him. Thanks, Mike. Mike's always a good person to see. He's one of the staunch opponents of IO. He does a great job, and he's a strong believer. He's full preterist, but man, he knows his scriptures, and I would disagree with most of his interpretations, or a great many of his interpretations, but he'll belt the scriptures at you. Boom. He's been on the channel a couple of times, but and then Berean Preterist weighed in. Let me see if I can find his comment. He said, it's Max Kingism, covenant eschatology, full preterism that has a conclusiveness of either universalism or Israel only. So if I'm not mistaken, he is actually and correct me if I'm wrong, Berean Preterist, but he is actually I think one of those immortal body at death view. So he goes with I think he might go with more of an Ed Stevens approach. But he said that it's Max King that is the covenant. It's not full preterism per se, and I've heard this too. You probably have as well. It's not full preterism per se. It's the covenant eschatology part of that. It's the Max King teaching of full preterism that leads to all these views. How would you respond to that?
I'm not certain where you separate that, because in the beginning, obviously back in the 70s is when Max King was already advocating it. And then you have Walt Hibbert, who basically republished the Parousia, James Stuart Russell, and that kind of really launched some of the preterists. And then you had the meeting in Mount Dora. Again, this is in the Complete Guide on Preterism. You had the preterists that met with Max King and the Reformed people in Mount Dora, the R.C. Sproul and some other ones. They met in Mount Dora, Florida, which is like 20 miles away from where I am currently. And that really kind of launched the partial preterism, because I was like, well, okay, we're not going that far. And so I don't think you can really untwine covenant eschatology. I know it kind of went in a different direction as time went on, but they all built from the same mold. And so I don't know who you'd say the founder or the main initiator is, because they're always going to be, for example, Calvinism. Calvin is not the founder of Calvinism. The 5 points weren't written until like 78 years after his death. So, but there is if we're going to say that, who's the main initiator of full preterism if it's not Max King? Maybe it's Ed Stevens. Ed Stevens, when early on, was writing a lot of, he was one of the main publishers. Or maybe it's John Noe. He put out a lot of books there in the very beginning. Who would we consider the main initiator of full preterism if it's not? Now, is Don Preston a covenant eschatology? I think this guy here, the Berean guy, can't remember his name, he's a real name, would say that, yes, Don Preston's part of the covenant eschatology. He's just carrying on that. Or is he a full preterist? Or is he a crossover? So there's a lot of stuff to consider in that dynamic.
Right. Well, those are some excellent insights. Any last words?
No, I want people to be honest with what they believe, whether it's, become an agnostic and hey, I just don't really know. I've studied myself so far. I don't know what to believe anymore. So like they said to Paul, driving your much studies, driving you to madness. And I think a lot of it's driving some of us to madness, because we want to break down every text. We know this little syllable here and this little mark here, this means that, and that's the reason why that means this. Well, maybe it doesn't. So then when you say that, then you get into subjectivism. So I've seen people say, well, I just want to be a minimalist. I want to believe the minimal part of the Bible. How about just be a historical communal Christian, which is within the realm of almost all denominations? For example, the 5 things that preterists believe, almost every denomination denies, or whatever denies, like the return of Christ. I don't care whether you're Baptist or a Roman Catholic or everything else. They all believe that at some point. The things that they argue over is how baptism is applied, who's it applied to, is there is there an Antichrist? Who is the Antichrist? There's the things they argue over. Is there a rapture, not a rapture? But they don't argue over the four or five things that preterists say that there's no unity. There definitely is unity.
Right. Well, I couldn't say it any better than that. I want to thank you, Roderick, for again contributing your valuable time. I know you're a busy man to this podcast and discussing these things. God bless again. Folks who are watching this can go to Amazon and check out your book. It's called How to Leave Preterism. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. We'll hopefully be back soon. I want to thank everybody for weighing in, and we'll talk to you later. God bless.
I appreciate it. Thank you much.